Imagine you are deep in debt, bills stacked, creditors calling, interest compounding by the day. Now imagine you own a machine, a legal government sanctioned machine that prints money, not metaphorically, literally. You have the machine, you have the paper, you have the ink, and yet you keep borrowing. You borrow from banks, from foreign governments, from pension funds, from ordinary people buying bonds over their lunch break. You pay interest on every single dollar. You let that debt grow, year after year, decade after decade, until it reaches numbers so large they stop feeling real. The United States, Japan, the United Kingdom, France, every major economy on earth does this. And here's the question nobody seems to ask out loud. Why? Why would any government, any institution with the legal authority to create its own currency, choose to borrow instead? The answer is not what you think. And once you understand it, you will never look at government spending, inflation, or financial power the same way again. Most people, when they hear this question, give the same answer. If you print too much money, you get inflation. And they are not wrong, but they are also not finished. Because that answer assumes printing is always dangerous and borrowing is always safe. Neither of those things is true, and the real story is far more interesting than a simple warning about inflation. Let us go back to basics. A government needs money to function. Roads, defense, healthcare, interest payments on old debt. The list is long. It has three ways to get that money. It can tax, it can borrow, or it can create it. Taxation is politically painful. Borrowing is palatable. And creation, well, creation is the option governments keep in a drawer, mostly out of sight, alongside a great deal of institutional anxiety about what happens if anyone uses it too freely. So why not just print? The textbook answer. Because printing money without a corresponding increase in goods and services devalues the currency and causes prices to rise. More money chasing the same amount of stuff means each unit of money buys less. Fine, that is real. That has happened. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. The historical examples are severe enough to make any central banker go pale at the suggestion. But here is what the textbook leaves out. Borrowing is not neutral either. Every time a government issues a bond, it is creating a future obligation. It is promising to pay back principal plus interest, often over decades. That interest has to come from somewhere, which means more taxes, more borrowing, or eventually more money creation anyway. Borrowing does not eliminate the problem, it defers it, and in many cases it makes it larger. So if printing carries inflation risk and borrowing carries debt risk, why does virtually every major government in the world choose debt as the default? The answer has nothing to do with economics textbooks. It has to do with control, credibility, and the architecture of the modern financial system. Here's a concept that does not get enough attention. A government's most valuable financial asset is not its tax base. It is not its GDP. It is not even its military. It is the market's belief that its currency means something. That belief, call it credibility, is fragile. It took centuries to build, and it can be destroyed in months. When a government borrows, it submits itself to a kind of discipline. Bond markets are not forgiving. Investors who buy government debt want to know they will be repaid with interest in a currency that still holds value when the bill comes due. If they doubt that, if they sense the government might inflate its way out of obligations, they demand higher interest rates. Sometimes they stop lending entirely. That external pressure, uncomfortable as it is, functions as a check on government behavior. Now remove that check. If a government can simply print whatever it needs, there is no natural constraint on spending, no market to disappoint, no creditors to answer to. No moment where an auction fails and a finance minister has to make an uncomfortable phone call. The political temptation becomes overwhelming. Need to fund a war? Print. Lose an election over austerity? Print. Face a financial crisis that demands a bailout? Print. And each time the machine runs, confidence in the currency erodes a little more. Slowly at first, then very quickly. This is not a hypothetical. It is played out in different forms in different countries across different centuries. The specifics change, the mechanism does not. Borrowing, by contrast, forces governments to make a public commitment. A bond is a contract. It has a maturity date, it has a coupon rate, it is listed, traded, and watched. Every time a government goes to market, the price of that bond tells you something about what the world thinks of that government's fiscal discipline. It is, in a strange way, accountability made visible. But there is a deeper layer here, one that most people never reach. The modern financial system is not built around governments spending money they have, it is built around debt. Think about that for a moment. When a commercial bank makes a loan, it does not pull cash from a vault and hand it over. It creates a new deposit, new money, conjured into existence by the act of lending. The borrower's new asset is the bank's new liability. The money did not exist before, now it does. Central banks operate on a similar principle. When the Federal Reserve buys government bonds, a process called quantitative easing, or QE, it credits the accounts of the banks selling those bonds. New reserves, new liquidity, created from nothing. In other words, the system already runs on money creation. The distinction between borrowing and printing is blurrier than it appears. What government borrowing does, what it accomplishes, that pure money creation does not, is route new money through the financial system in a way that looks, feels, and legally constitutes an exchange. The government issues a bond, an investor buys it, money flows in. The government spends. That money circulates. On the surface, borrowing. But when the central bank steps in and buys those bonds on the secondary market, which it does regularly in large volumes, the effective result is that the government has spent money the central bank created. This is not a conspiracy. It is not a secret. It is how the system operates and has operated for decades. The borrowing mechanism exists in part to maintain the appearance of discipline while allowing the flexibility that large modern states require. It keeps bond markets functional. It preserves the institutional credibility of the currency. It gives the central bank a tool, interest rates, that it can use to influence the economy, and it distributes government obligations across the global investor base, tying the financial interests of pension funds, foreign governments, and sovereign wealth funds to the stability of the issuing country. When Japan borrows, its creditors want Japan to remain solvent. When the United States borrows, the world's largest financial institutions hold American paper. They have skin in the game. Their interests align, however imperfectly, with American stability. That alignment, that network of mutual financial dependency, is part of what makes reserve currency status so powerful, and part of why it is so fiercely protected. Here is where the story gets uncomfortable. The United States currently carries over $33 trillion in national debt. Japan's debt to GDP ratio exceeds 250%. Most advanced economies have debt loads that by any traditional measure they will never fully repay, not reduce, not restructure, not repay. The assumption built into the model is that the debt simply rolls over. Old bonds mature. New bonds are issued to cover them plus interest. The pile grows. And as long as growth exceeds the effective interest rate, as long as the economy expands faster than the debt compounds, the system remains technically sustainable. That is a very specific set of conditions, and it does not always hold. When interest rates rise faster than growth, as they did sharply in 2022 and 2023, the math tightens. The cost of servicing existing debt increases. Governments must spend more just to stand still. Spending on actual services gets crowded out. Or taxes rise. Or more debt is issued to cover the interest on previous debt. That last option has a name. It is called a debt spiral. And while it sounds dramatic, it is a very real dynamic that has affected countries ranging from Argentina to Greece to, in earlier centuries, some of the most powerful empires in history. The honest answer to why governments borrow instead of print is not that borrowing is safe. It is that borrowing is slow. The consequences arrive later. The reckoning, if it comes, falls to a future government, a future generation, a future electorate. Printing, by contrast, is fast. Inflation is immediate. The political cost is visible and personal, felt at the grocery store, at the gas pump, in the monthly rent. Governments are run by people with electoral cycles. The incentives favor delay. There is a version of this story the public is usually told. It goes like this. Governments borrow responsibly within their means to fund productive investments. The debt is manageable, the system is stable, and the central bank exists to keep everything in balance. The reality is somewhat different. Governments borrow because the alternative, taxing enough to fund all spending, is politically impossible. They borrow because the financial system is designed to absorb government debt and route it back into the economy as a form of safe, liquid asset. They borrow because the creditors who buy that debt have enormous incentive to keep the system functioning, and they borrow because the line between borrowing and money creation has, in practice, become very thin. None of this means the system is about to collapse. Large, complex systems are remarkably resilient. The modern financial architecture has survived repeated crises, 2008, 2020, and many before them, through a combination of institutional response, coordinated policy, and yes, significant amounts of money creation dressed up in the language of lending. But resilience is not the same as soundness, and functioning is not the same as sustainable. The question is not whether governments will keep borrowing. They will. The question is, what happens when the conditions that make borrowing manageable, low interest rates, consistent growth, stable reserve currency status, stop being guaranteed? That question is not hypothetical. Several of those conditions have already changed. So, why do governments borrow money they could simply print? Because printing, done visibly and at scale, destroys the thing that makes money valuable in the first place, the belief that it means something. Because borrowing creates a system of obligations that ties powerful financial interests to the stability of the state. Because the architecture of modern finance was built around debt, not around money. And the two have become so intertwined that pulling one thread risks unraveling the other. And because the consequences of borrowing arrive slowly, quietly, and someone else's problem. The machine exists, the ink is ready. The decision not to use it, or to use it carefully at a distance, through layers of institutional separation, is not restraint for its own sake. It is the carefully maintained illusion that the money in your pocket was earned, not invented. Whether that illusion is a feature of the system or a flaw, that is a question worth sitting with. Because the answer changes everything about how you see the economy. Taxes, deficits, inflation, crisis, wealth distribution, all of it looks different once you understand what debt actually is.